All right, we'll go ahead and get right into it. This is probably not quite an emergency episode of BuzzBeat since we're going to be doing this the day after the topic of discussion. But I'm Brian. I'll be joined by Lee. We're live talking Hornets basketball and LaMelo Ball injury, and this will also be up in podcast format on all the various podcast feeds tomorrow, which will be Tuesday, November 28th. But we're coming live Monday, 27th. Lee, real quickly, how are you doing tonight, man?
I'm good, BG. Good to be back on the airwaves, even if it's to discuss, some disappointing news, and to have a conversation around LaMelo and probably more, around that and what its effects are going to be on what's already been a bit of a disappointing season
Mm-hmm.
for the Charlotte Hornets. So yeah, man, let's get into it. We're 15
Yeah.
games in too. That's kind of wild.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to believe. It's gone by. First, 5-6 weeks have gone by very quickly of the season. But LaMelo Ball, who had started all 15 games so far this year, averaging just under 25 points per game, 8.2 assists per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, shooting 86% from the line on a career best 4.2 attempts per game, shooting just under 39% from deep and 44% overall from the field. But on the road, game one of a 3-game road trip for the Hornets, LaMelo Ball late in the second quarter drives to the basket while being guarded by Paolo Banchero. He goes up to shoot, I guess, kind of like a contested layup. He comes down funny. LaMelo did not, unless just based off of what I saw on replays, did not look like he landed on someone else's foot. Like I was sort of expecting him for this to have happened to have landed on someone's shoe or someone's foot or something like that. And it looked like his foot, it hit the court flush, like without any sort of like other, interruption from like an outside person. But obviously you could see the foot sort of almost the ankle sort of like buckle a little bit. And he went down and certainly was not able to get up. Game had to be stopped after 2 more exchanges up and down the court. LaMelo is brought off the court. The Hornets PR department not too long after that tweets out, and the words they used was he suffered a left ankle strain, not sprain, which is potentially interesting wording on their part. LaMelo currently as doubtful for Tuesday's game against the New York Knicks, who the Hornets are playing for the 9th time already this season. But it's a pretty considerable bummer. LaMelo was playing excellent basketball. This team's best player this season, as expected. And Lee, before the year started, you and I talked about the possibility of LaMelo making an All-Star game. It was on one of our preseason pods.
Right.
And I know I did. I think we both sort of like went on him making the All-Star roster. That didn't look like it was off to a great start the first 2 or 3 games, but he's been on a tear the last few weeks and playing, I would say, like the best basketball of his young career, at least on the offensive side of the court. We can get into some more of the numbers here, but just your initial thoughts, assuming LaMelo is going to miss some time, or if he does come back, potentially be compromised, not playing at 100%, the risk of re-injuring, and just like where that leaves Charlotte now with a backcourt that is thoroughly depleted with injuries. Like they get Terry Rozier back in the same game. LaMelo Ball goes down.
Yeah, I mean that's I think the big crux of this. It's obviously losing LaMelo is massively impactful to this team, particularly offensively. The Hornets through 15 games are basically a league average offense right now, which is fine. I think you would have hoped that they would have regained a bit more of that like top 12 offensive form they had when under James Borrego, when they had this very similar core, adding Mark Williams. That hasn't been the case yet, and obviously everybody who probably listens to this podcast knows the defensive numbers are in the cellar. Even a Steve Clifford coach Charlotte Hornets team cannot seem to defend at all right now. So, but to your point, Brian, like obviously it's impactful for so many obvious reasons. The other reason why this is such a massive deal for this Hornets roster, this iteration of this Hornets roster specifically, is because of the just absolute, like desert of playmaking outside of LaMelo Ball. We kind of chronicled this roster building decision from the Hornets going back 3 years ago when when you don't re-sign Malik Monk and you trade Devontae Graham. Then like that's what this leaves. I mean, we've essentially tried to kind of like spitball, put together some sort of like illusion of backup point guard duties. The only thing this front office has done that worked, they probably did almost by accident, which was Dennis Smith Jr., who did, at times last year really alleviate that backup point guard position. Other than that, it's been a hodgepodge of, your Brad Wanamakers and your Ish Smiths and your Teo Maladones, and it just hasn't worked. So when LaMelo Ball is not inserted in this lineup, you all of a sudden are in a position again where you're depending on Terry Rozier for much more playmaking than you should be. Of course, Gordon Hayward is always a great playmaker and connector, but even he cannot carry the load that LaMelo Ball does. So it's, I think that is a point that, our audience is not unfamiliar with. It's just the fact that when LaMelo's absence is felt, it's felt very hard on this roster because they've done nothing to address the kind of secondary and tertiary playmaking off the bench.
Yeah. And I mean, look, they picked up Ntilikina in September? And Ed Sumner probably later in the fall, and then Sumner was released even before the start of the regular season, if I have my timeline correctly. But like that is absolute dumpster diving for. I mean, I think even if you had Ntilikina, I mean, he might give you some boost defensively. They certainly wanted to play him in the DSJ role, but like
Exactly.
I don't think that would have really helped in terms of like Charlotte's like ball handling, playmaking. It would have been a nice opportunity for Frank. So it does kind of, it's unfortunate that he's been hurt and has missed some good reps this year. And it should be noted too. I think Spencer probably mentioned this or we'll have a segment with Spencer at some point here to talk about the ankle. But look, this is the same ankle that LaMelo had season-ending surgery on this March. 9-10 months ago. He missed 46 games last season. He missed the first 13 of the year with a left ankle injury, then bookended the season with the right ankle that required surgery. He's obviously missed time going back to his rookie year. That was for a wrist injury, but unfortunately, this happened in a pretty scary, compromised area. You certainly, with these like high performance explosive athletes, you worry about the ankle, you worry about the foot. I think those are two things to really keep an eye on here, though it does seem like hopefully maybe Charlotte has avoided like the absolute worst case scenario, but we'll certainly see how things play out. And look, as wonky as like LaMelo's play can be sometimes, and sometimes the shot selection is not amazing. Sometimes the decision making is like either he's like it's a little frenetic, or he's like one play ahead and of everyone else or whatever. For whatever it's worth, never really been like a high turnover player. So I think some of the head scratching plays sometimes are just like sort of like out of rhythm threes at weird points of the shot clock from too far away. But LaMelo this season, I mean, having his best year as a pick and roll ball handler through 15 games, albeit, but just under 0.98 points per possession when he uses a pick and roll ball handling possession, with an effective shooting rate of 55.4%. And a turnover rate under 16%. When LaMelo uses a pick and roll possession, this includes passes to other players. The Hornets are scoring 1.056 points per possession. That ranks in the 71st percentile in the league, with an effective shooting rate of 57%. Again, he's using a lot of those possessions, but we've seen the pick and roll playmaking with Mark Williams, with Nick Richards when he's been healthy. We've seen it in some of the his ability to get downhill and spray out to PJ, to Gordon Hayward, to Brandon Miller. I was looking at this earlier on PvP stats, but the top 4 assist to scorer combinations on the Hornets this year are LaMelo Ball to player X, player Y, player Z, player A. It's LaMelo Ball to PJ Washington, LaMelo Ball to Gordon Hayward, LaMelo Ball to Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball to Brandon Miller. Those are the top 4 assist to scorer combinations on the roster. We've talked plenty on this pod about wanting to see LaMelo get downhill more, be more patient in the pick and roll, and also put more pressure on the rim. I think the sort of like the live ball middle, sort of when LaMelo's going downhill, he's got a defender on his hip, he's attacking his center and drop. I think that still leaves a little something to be desired, but I think he's been better in that arena so far this year. And he's just playing hard and getting downhill and putting pressure on the rim, which is I think one of the reasons why this ankle injury does suck, because he was doing that. It's literally what he was in the process of doing, attacking Banchero on a switch like that. But a high percentage of his shots are coming at the rim, a career high percentage of his shots are coming at the rim. And early on, of the shots that he's made within 4 feet of the rim, 92% of those makes have been unassisted. So we've seen the live ball, shot creation, rim pressure from LaMelo improve this year. And he was shooting prior to the Orlando game. I haven't checked these numbers since before last night, but he was shooting, I think, above 43% on pick and roll, off dribble threes this season, isolating not just for pull up threes, but for specifically out of the pick and roll, which was one of the best numbers in the league amongst high volume guys, right up there with Tyrese Halliburton, who was sort of in a league of his own in that category right now. The Hornets are 3 points per 100 possessions better on offense with LaMelo on the court. They play faster with LaMelo on the court. He's been a huge force for them offensively, and there's just no real way to replace him. I think even by trying to spread it out and do it piecemeal style, because they're just so decimated in the backcourt. And even though they have guys on the wing who can do it, you're not asking them to pick up 20 extra ball handling possessions and spread it out amongst 4 guys. This is 80 ball handling possessions per game, and then spread it out amongst 3 to 4 guys. So I don't know. Lee, do you have anything else to add on LaMelo's impact, or we can maybe even sort of turn the page and sort of think about what this may mean for Charlotte if he's going to miss an extended period of time?
Well, yeah. So that's the interesting thing. I mean, based on, Spencer's tweet earlier, it's possible that they may have avoided the worst, and we'll kind of have to see over the next couple of days how this develops and what the timetable actually looks like. What I will say, to kind of add on to some of, your comments about why this is, a problem. I also think, as we've talked about Brandon Miller and his development and his strengths, not having LaMelo Ball on the floor to set the table for him to be able to take advantage of the fact that he is a fairly intelligent kind of cutter and mover into space as a young player. Obviously the shooting isn't quite where you'd like it to be, but he is going to become a proficient catch and shoot player, in my opinion, and continues to take those shots off of LaMelo. So unfortunately, Brandon Miller's, weakness right now is kind of his creation, his ball handling, things of that nature. And unfortunately, those are the things that he might be kind of forced into doing a bit more with LaMelo out of the lineup. Now, I guess you could look at that on the other end of things. And let's say, for example, if this is a worst case scenario, we don't know this now, but okay, LaMelo's out for, months, right? I guess you could look at it on the other side and say, well, this team isn't going anywhere anyways. Let's have another high pick and let's just really let Brandon Miller explore his space and figure, but I guess the argument I'm making on a shorter time frame is not having the table setter on the floor is detrimental to Brandon Miller currently because of his current skill set.
Totally agree. we've talked about this. It might actually be like my favorite part of the season so far, outside of maybe just like LaMelo's, offensive fireworks, has been the team has found a nice role for they had the nice plan for Miller coming into the season, and I've really appreciated the execution for it. They've put him into movement sets. They've given him some pick and roll opportunities, but when those happen, it's often like a drag ball screen in transition, or it's him coming off of a screen into a dribble handoff, or him there's some screen to screener action where Miller is setting a rip screen or a back screen, and then he's flowing into a handoff from there, and he can look to shoot, or he can look to get downhill. I think his catch and go playmaking has been really nice this year. You see him jab with the right foot, swim through back to his left, and he can get downhill that way. But right now, Lee, like you touched on it, his biggest issue as far as like, where his offense is at is like his inability to create offense without a screen. And even then, he's still like, he can be a little compromised. And it's not like he can't score in isolation, but it is certainly like the biggest like fly in the ointment for him. At the moment, when he tries to do it, it can produce some like pretty awkward runners and floaters where he's trying to like extend and finish over guys from tough distances and tough angles. Like, again, Miller's rookie season so far has been phenomenal. I think he's been like a top 4 or 5 rookie in the league. Yeah. I would say Chet, Wembanyama, obviously. Jaquez at Miami has been very, very good. I'm leaving off. There's another.
Cason Wallace has been really good.
Cason Wallace has been very good. There's a third guy I'm leaving off the list right now. It's embarrassing. But I still think even with all of those guys, I think Miller is certainly like deserving of a top. Right now, I think if you held it, he would probably finish back end of first team all rookie. It's maybe silly to do before the calendar flips, but on one hand, this means he's going to get the ball more, which like those reps, I guess, could be seen as valuable for Miller and his development going forward. It could produce some sort of like clunky offense for him too. Yeah. And so on one hand, again, it's sort of exciting that maybe he'll get more time on the ball, and perhaps that's good for his development. But at the same time, it will probably, again, if LaMelo is going to miss an extended period, it can also take Miller out of the bubble that he was working from, and sort of like maybe speeds up the timeline Charlotte had for like moving more playmaking, responsibility and load in the direction of 24. We're certainly going to see more Terry Rozier on the basketball. That's something we've seen in years past when LaMelo has been hurt. The results for that aren't great, especially when Ish Smith is one of the other guards on the court. It was sort of tough watching some of those possessions in the second half, as the last night against Orlando. As the Hornets are trying to mount a comeback, and it's Rozier, PJ pick and rolls with Ish Smith in the corner and Anthony Black having 2 feet inside the paint. Anthony Black's had a really nice rookie season for the Magic too. He deserves some love. He had kind of a quiet game last night, but still a couple pretty fun possessions. He had a really nice touch pass in transition. I like Anthony Black for Orlando. They've got just a lot of awesome young players there, but I imagine we'll see more of the playmaking load also go to Hayward, to Bridges, and I think you saw some hints last night of what that could look like, which is Charlotte having to invert things and play out of the post with like Hayward, Bridges, and PJ initiating from there. Maybe you could move those guys to the elbow, get some corner action going that way. But that's tough sledding. That's not just come up, run pistol action, flow into pick and roll and get cooking from there. Like it's a little bit different. They're gonna have to be a little bit more methodical. They're gonna have to think about matchups a little bit more. There's like stuff they can do. And if you are initiating through the post, Rozier and Miller can still be like threats as guys coming off screens and handoffs. Like they do a lot of like Clifford runs some good action to get those guys loose for threes and for jumpers in those scenarios. But that's just harder basketball to play. And obviously without Melo, this team, they're not as fast. They're not going to be as dynamic in transition. And that's another area where Miller was really getting some good stuff. You touched on the corner cuts. That's been a real big boon for Miller so far this year, and a lot of that has come with LaMelo pick and roll, and just Jason Tatum caught ball watching, or some other wing defender caught ball watching, and Miller's able to slice back door and get a bucket. And LaMelo's vision and live ball passing can be pretty special. Even in the half court where he's maybe not quite as good as the open floor. Beyond that, like, this is stating what I think was already obvious even before the LaMelo injury, but like, if he's going to miss an extended period of time, I mean, it's tough because like the 2024 draft, I think there's a lot of really good players in it. There's probably no one worth like tanking for,
Right.
As much as I like Alex Sarr, Isaiah Collier, Ron Holland. These guys are not Victor Wembanyama. They're not Scoot Henderson. They're not Cooper Flagg 2 years from two draft cycles from now. So I do think the imperatives from a team build perspective would become, what can you get for guys like Rozier and Hayward? Like, if this thing's really going to go sideways here, and I guess that raises the question, like, what does the offense look like in the interim, other than really, really bad and well below league average? I don't know what to say, but if this is going to be a lost season, you got to see what you can get for some of the veterans. And again, I think it was sort of already trending in that direction.
And BG, you can't go the opposite way. You can't go get Malcolm Brogdon. Like, please,
don't do that. Don't do that unless the price is like shockingly low.
Yeah, right.
In which case, then whatever. But no, that's not the pathway to go. I don't even think that was the pathway to go before the season started. And the Hornets were sort of like looking around for guard depth. And I remember Richie and I did a pod on the possibility of them going after DeLon Wright.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like they were going to need to trade for him. And Richie and I sort of came to the conclusion, like, no, don't do this. It's not worth giving up anything for a backup guard. So I don't know. They're obviously in a bad place. I can't remember what the timeline is for Ntilikina to return. Obviously, Frank back in the lineup would help. Maybe we see some more Nick Smith Jr., but obviously his time with the varsity squad this year has been limited and not all that good. So, I like Smith going forward as a prospect. It's just no surprise his rookie year is probably going to be a little tough from a winning basketball perspective. But, man, this is just what happens when you, over years, something like this, like, the injury to LaMelo really sucks, and like I feel bad for him because again I think he'd been
the draft has been spotty.
They could have had two. They could have had two Basically, they could have had two lottery picks in 2022. They opted to move one of those, and that eventually became a bunch of different picks, including the Denver's pick, which turned into Nick Smith Jr. So like we can see the through line of that very easily, but. You could have Jalen Duren on this roster, AJ Griffin. There's like Tari Eason. There's like a lot of like guys that are like NBA rotation players, or like fringe NBA rotation players on good teams that you could have on this roster that would plug holes. And like, there just isn't any of that. And again, this speaks to why I think this team is so desperate for a rebuild because, no team can like sustain like an injury to their star guard. Like you can see Memphis is like falling apart without right now. In years past, they've been able to sort of like stabilize without him, but they no longer have Tyus Jones. And so, but for Charlotte to now become like, I mean, without LaMelo, I imagine this team projects as like the worst offense in the league or like the 25th offense in the league. Like I'm not entirely sure, but you add that with what is the worst defense, like maybe they play a little bit better on defense without LaMelo, but obviously like this is going to be like a pretty large like net negative. So I feel bad for LaMelo. Hopefully he can get healthy. That's what matters most, is him not rushing back from this injury to take his time. And, long term, you just hope he's okay and that his ankles are okay and he's able to play, 70 plus games for the next 10 or 12 seasons. But focusing on this right now, it's a pretty bleak picture for the Hornets, even if you can, sort of like shake the snow globe up a little bit and look at it from a different angle and see the occasional positive, the added playmaking for Brandon Miller, or maybe Nick Smith Jr. gets minutes or whatever. But everything else is pretty bleak. So hopefully, injury's not too serious for LaMelo. Hopefully he
later in the week. But we wanted to give some analysis and thoughts, right, on what this means for the Hornets, and certainly our opinions. And this is a fluid situation, but this is kind of how we